Hey guys, welcome back. It's me, Miss Birds. Today we are going to be discussing value and looking at creating our own value scale. We've talked a lot about value in the past, value being the lightness or darkness of a color, and we kind of studied it in a gray scale, so using black and white and gray values in between. And we also kind of looked through our Nearpod at value being used with color. So today we're going to be creating our very own value scale. We are going to be working with pencil today. Now, of course, values can also be used, or a value scale can be used with colors, not exactly colored pencils. When we're looking at value scales, you can do it with a colored pencil. You would just be doing the same technique where you're either applying pressure on the pencil or taking pressure off of the pencil. Typically, we see value scales that are done in color with paint. So adding a little bit of white to make the color a tint, or adding a little bit of black to make the color a shade. Because most of us may not have paints at home, we're going to be working with a pencil, and we're going to be learning how to create a value scale using graphite, and this will also hopefully help you in your future drawings with shading. So that's what we're going to be using today. So for our materials, obviously you're going to want to make sure that you have a pencil, an eraser of some sort, a sheet of paper. Right now I'm using white copy paper, which is great. If you don't have white copy paper, any type of paper will really work. Even if it has lines on it like notebook paper, that will also be fine. You're probably going to want to make sure that you have some type of pencil sharpener available to you. We're going to probably run down the lead a lot, because part of the technique is pushing down really hard on the pencil. So you want to make sure you have something available to sharpen your pencil with. And then of course we want to make sure if we have a ruler available that we are using the ruler. And if not, just anything that pretty much has a straight edge that will allow you to create a straight line. So let's go ahead and start by creating our value scale. You can set yours at the top of the page or the top center of the page. For this demonstration, for the drawing tutorial, I'm pretty much just going to leave it a little bit centered, just so you can see it a little bit better on my paper. Now, typically when we do a value scale, we want to make sure that all of the boxes are the same size. And so when I do this with students and we're in class and we all have rulers available, we typically do it so that each box measures 1 inch in height and 1 inch in width. Now, some of you may not have a ruler available, but if we're looking at a ruler, the inch mark is about that big. About that big. So if I take my fingers and go like this, about that, you can kind of measure them together and do 6 spaces and kind of just mark it on your paper. That will be fine. I'm just going to go ahead and start marking my 6 inches using my ruler. So I'm going to place it in the center of my paper. Again, you can place yours wherever you'd like. I'm going to measure it 6 inches wide. And I'm also going to make it so the boxes are 1 inch tall. So they're going to be little 1 by 1 inch boxes, which will be perfect for our value scale. Again, you want to make sure that your boxes are all the same size. We don't want one to be any larger than the other. Should all be pretty even, taking up the same amount of space. That way we can really see the difference in value. So I'm just making pretty much just a large rectangle. I think I actually maybe done it a little bit crooked, so I will fix that. So remember, a tool is only as good as the artist that's using it, right? I had my ruler, but I didn't really have it even. So that's not really going to create a nice straight line, right? So make sure that when you're using tools like a ruler, you always make sure you're using them properly and set them up so that you don't have a slanted line. All right, I'm going to flip it over. On the other side. So right now I have a large rectangle, and I'm just going to go through and measure it so that I have 6 individual spaces. So anytime there's an inch line, I'm just going to go through and mark the inch. So I'm going to mark the 1 inch line, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, 5 inch. and that's going to give me 6 boxes. Can use my ruler again to just even these out and separate my large rectangle. So at the end of this, we should have 6 boxes that measure 1 inch wide by 1 inch tall. There we go. So again, they're all pretty much the same size here. And I'm just going to number them. You can do this at the top of the bottom, but I'm going to number them 1 through 6. So whenever we're starting a value scale, we're going from the lightest value to the darkest value. Now, this can be done 2 different ways. We can either start with our lightest value in the 1 place, right, in that first box, and then go darker and darker to the 6th box. Or we can make this the darkest value and then go to the lightest value. I'm gonna start doing, I always do my darkest box on the left and then go to my lightest value at the front. So what I'm going to do is we're gonna leave the number 1 box, or whichever box is going to be your lightest value, we're gonna leave it the white of the paper. And I'm gonna go from my opposite side. Now, there are a couple ways that you can do this. Okay, you can start with one side and kind of just gradually go over to the other boxes. What I like to do when I'm setting up a value scale is I like to start from one side and then go to the opposite side, and then go to the next box in, and then the next box on the opposite side, until I go back and forth and then meet in the center. And the reason why I do this is because I feel like it's a lot easier to gauge a difference between your values when you're kind of going back and forth, back and forth. Sometimes if you start on one end and then move to the other side, you don't really have as smooth as a transition, or your transition is too smooth that we don't really see a difference of values in each box. So keep in mind when we're doing a value scale, there should be a different value in each one of these boxes. No box should look exactly the same, but there should be a smooth transition of values from our darkest value to our lightest value, okay? That is the trick. That is the skill that we are trying to make sure we learn the best, okay? That we execute the best, I should say. So I'm gonna start on my 6 box, my box number 6, and this is going to be my darkest value. Now, using pencil, we create dark and light values by either applying pressure to the pencil, so pushing down on the pencil really hard, or taking pressure off of the pencil, kind of just letting it glide across the paper. Because my number 6 box is going to be my darkest box, I'm going to push down as hard as I possibly can on my paper. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to completely fill in my number 6 box. Now, I want to make sure that I'm staying inside the lines, and that I'm also not going into box number 5, because box number 5 should be a different value. So I only want box number 6 to be the darkest value. What I typically like to do is start by kind of filling in the box in one direction. So I'll start by coloring everything in vertically, and then I'll kind of switch my paper around and go horizontally. This will help kind of clean up any of the white spots that you may still see remaining under your paper. Remember, this is our darkest value, so we should not be able to see through this value. We shouldn't be able to see the paper. So I'm going to make sure I completely color in this box, leaving no white spaces, making sure that it's nice and clean. And this is why I said you're going to want to make sure you have a pencil sharpener, right? Because as you can see, my pencil was completely sharp, and now I've kind of dulled my pencil down a lot just by applying that pressure. Now you may have a little bit of extra residue that kind of comes off of your pencil, and you can kind of just, right, give it a little dust of wind and it'll kind of blow off your paper. We don't want it to smear the paper, so if you just kind of like blow on it really quick, it'll go away by itself. Okay, so I have my darkest value and I have my lightest value. So because I went to my darkest value, I'm going to go back to a lighter value. So I'm going to go to box number 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of hold the pencil, not here where I would normally hold it, because this is going to give us a lot of control, right? I'm going to be able to really control my pencil and how much pressure I'm applying when I hold it like this. Once I move my hand down a little bit and I hold it towards the end, I can't really push down as hard on my pencil. I kind of just let the pencil glide across the paper, and that creates a very light value. So remember, when we're doing value scales and we're practicing that skill of applying pressure and taking pressure off, we want to be very cautious of how much pressure we're applying. Values that are very dark, you want to push down really hard on the pencil. Values that are going to be very light, you kind of just want your pencil to glide more across the paper. So I'm going to hold my pencil at the very end, and I'm just going to lightly put down some value. You may not even really be able to see it that much on the screen, but I can definitely see it in my box. So just a small enough value. Remember, we should have a nice even gradation between our lightest box. Moving over to our darkest box. So I don't want to fill my box in too much. Again, I'm kind of just letting the pencil glide across the paper until I have a small, very small amount of value in there, making it just slightly different from box number 1. So I have box number 1, box number 2, and now I'm going to go over to box number 5. Now box number 5 will still be a very dark value. It just won't be as dark as number 6. So let's go ahead. I'm going to move my hand down on my pencil, gain more control back, and I'm going to apply some pressure. Again, I am pushing down on my pencil, which is creating that darker value. It's going to automatically give me that darker scale that I want. I'm going to flip my paper over and go to the opposite side. So notice, even though I have a dark value, it's still not as dark as box number 6. Not as dark as box number 6. I'm still creating a very dark value. But again, we want that nice smooth transition in between all of our boxes. So I am clearing up any areas on my box or my square that look like they may be some of the white of the paper. And you can already see, again, it is a very dark value, but it's not as dark as box number 6. So we're going to have that smooth transition. So now I'm going to move to box number 3, making it just a darker, slightly darker value than what I have in box number 2. I'm going to hold my pencil more towards the back end by the eraser, and I'm still going to be gliding my pencil, but just applying a little bit more pressure. I'm still going to have a lighter value, but this is where we're going to start getting into our mid-tone values. So we had our light values like number 1 and 2, we had our really dark values like 5 and 6, and now 3 and 4 are going to be our mid-tone values. So they're going to be a pretty even, solid gray, not as dark as our dark values, not as light as our lighter values. Going to go back and forth and color in both directions. Until I completely fill that box. Again, even though this is a light value, I really don't want to see too much of the white of the paper in the background. So I'm just going to try to cover it up nicely. And that leaves us with box number 4. Now, for this box, I want to make sure I create a value that is a little bit darker than number 3, but not as dark as number 5. So I'm going to be applying a little bit more pressure onto my pencil so that I have a nice solid change of value. Again, we don't want any of the boxes to look the same, but we don't want there to be a really big difference between the boxes either as we move left to right. So I don't want to see a box like number 1 and number 6 right next to each other, because that's not what we would call a smooth transition. We want the colors to very nicely and, like I said, be very smooth as they're transitioning over from one side of the spectrum of the scale to the other. So we're just practicing that technique of identifying those different values and learning how to create those values with just our pencil. Again, going through and filling up any part of my box or my square that may have a little bit of the white of the paper in the background. I want to make sure I don't make it as dark as box number 5 because it should still be a lighter value, but it should definitely be darker than box number 3. And there is our completed value scale. So on your paper, you should have a difference between box number 1, box number 6, box number 2, box number 5, box number 3, and box number 4. Remember, we should have a smooth transition. Each box should hold a different value, and your scale should either go light to the darkest value or the darkest value to the lightest value, or opposite, right? You could have your lightest value on the right-hand side going to the darkest value, however you set it up. Essentially, the technique that we're learning is applying pressure to our pencil. So applying pressure to create those darker values, and then kind of just letting our pencil glide across our paper, or applying a very light amount of pressure so that we can create our lightest values here.